In 44 BC, a group of 60 Roman senators surrounded the most powerful man alive and stabbed him 23 times. They walked out of that room covered in his blood, and they expected a standing ovation. They didn't get one. Instead, over the next 12 years, every single one of those men would be tracked down. Some were tortured so badly their own families couldn't identify their remains. One was forced to watch his soldiers switch sides before being dragged through the mud and beheaded in front of strangers. Another killed himself over a battlefield mistake, a fog of war that didn't even exist. Not one of them died of old age. And the strangest part, the teenage boy who destroyed them all, wasn't even supposed to matter. Stay here, because what happened to each of these men is far worse than what they did to Caesar. History Digger covers the history that most channels are too afraid to touch. If you're not subscribed yet, you're missing the worst of it. Hit subscribe now. The assassination of Julius Caesar was not a sudden act of rage. It took months to build. There were meetings held in private homes after dark. Names were written on lists and then burned. Senators who couldn't be trusted were excluded. Senators who could be pressured were recruited. The entire operation ran on two things: resentment and fear. Resentment because Caesar had crushed every rival, absorbed every title, and bent every institution in Rome around himself. And fear because the men in that room believed that if they didn't act now, the window would close permanently. But conspiracies this large have a structural problem. 60 men keeping a secret means 60 points of failure, one loose conversation, one guilty conscience, one senator who drinks too much wine at dinner and says something he shouldn't. So they moved fast, and they built the entire plot around 3 men. Cassius Longinus had once been one of the most decorated military commanders in Rome. He fought in the East. The man who built the conspiracy wasn't Brutus. Most people don't know his name. Cassius Longinus had survived Carrhae, the worst military disaster in Roman history. 20,000 soldiers dead in a single afternoon. Cassius walked out. That kind of survival doesn't make you grateful. It makes you calculating. And Cassius had a grievance. Caesar kept promoting men over him, passing him for positions he believed he'd earned. When Caesar declared himself dictator for life, Cassius didn't see tyranny in the abstract. He saw a closed door, a future where men like him would never rise again. Cassius didn't need to be convinced. He was the convincing. He wrote letters. He held meetings in the back rooms of senatorial homes. He built the network piece by piece. But Cassius understood something critical about Roman politics. A room full of bitter senators looks exactly like what it is: a power grab. They needed someone the public trusted, someone whose name alone would reframe the entire thing. They needed Brutus. Marcus Junius Brutus was Roman aristocracy at its most prestigious. His family traced directly to the man who had overthrown Rome's last king and founded the Republic itself. That name carried centuries of weight. Brutus was a philosopher. He wrote about virtue and duty. He believed, or at least convinced himself, that the Republic was a system worth dying for. Caesar knew all of this, and trusted him anyway. He had pardoned Brutus after the Civil War, promoted him to a key political position, and treated him with what Romans described as fatherly affection. Some sources claim Caesar may actually have been his father, the result of an affair with Brutus's mother Servilia, decades earlier. Whether or not that was true, the relationship was real, and Cassius exploited every inch of it. Anonymous letters began appearing at Brutus's home, messages carved onto his ancestor's statue in the Forum, all saying the same thing: "Your ancestor saved Rome from a king. What are you doing?" Brutus joined, and with his name attached, the assassination could be framed as principle rather than ambition. But there's a third man, the one history books usually skip, and he might be the most important of all: Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus. Not to be confused with Marcus Brutus, was Caesar's closest personal friend. They had fought together in Gaul. Caesar had trusted him with independent military commands. He named Decimus as a secondary heir in his will. This was not a political ally. This was the man Caesar ate dinner with. On the morning of March 15th, Caesar almost didn't show up. His wife Calpurnia had nightmares. Reports of bad omens were circulating through Rome. Caesar told his staff he would skip the Senate session that day. The entire plot nearly collapsed. Decimus went to Caesar's home personally. He told Caesar the omens were misread. He told him the Senate was preparing to offer him a new honor. He told him it would look weak to cancel because of a woman's dreams. Caesar went. Decimus walked beside him all the way to the theater of Pompey. He led his closest friend into a room where 60 men waited with daggers hidden in their togas. When the session began, a senator named Julius Caesar approached Caesar with a petition. He grabbed Caesar's toga and yanked it from his shoulder. That was the signal. Cassius struck first. A clumsy slash to Caesar's neck that barely broke skin. Caesar spun, grabbed the blade, and shouted. Then the rest closed in. 23 stab wounds, inflicted by senators stumbling over each other, some cutting their own allies in the frenzy. It was chaotic. It was messy. One ancient source records that most wounds were superficial. The fatal ones came from just 2 or 3 blades. Caesar fought back at first. Then he saw Brutus. He stopped resisting. He pulled his toga over his face and fell at the base of Pompey's statue. The senators stood over the body, blood on their hands and robes. Some smeared it on their faces. They raised their daggers and walked out into the forum, expecting cheering crowds. The forum was empty. The people of Rome had heard screaming and ran. What followed is one of the most catastrophic political miscalculations in recorded history. The conspirators had spent months planning how to kill Caesar. They had spent 0 time planning what to do after. No speech prepared, no transition of power arranged, no military force secured, no message sent to the legions, no successor named. 60 men had just murdered the head of state in broad daylight, and their entire plan for the aftermath was, the people will understand. The people did not understand. Mark Antony was Caesar's co-consul and most loyal ally. On the day of the assassination, Trebonius, one of the conspirators, had been specifically assigned to keep Antony outside the chamber. He engaged him in conversation in the corridor, while the killing happened inside. The conspirators had debated killing Antony too. Brutus refused. He argued that killing more people would make them look like tyrants rather than liberators. That single decision would cost nearly all of them their lives. Within hours, Antony secured Caesar's personal documents, his treasury, and his will. He convinced Caesar's widow Calpurnia to hand over everything. Then he requested permission to speak at Caesar's funeral. The conspirators agreed. Another catastrophic mistake. Caesar's funeral took place in the Roman Forum. Thousands gathered. Soldiers, citizens, freed slaves, merchants, the poor who had benefited most from Caesar's policies. Antony stood over the body. He didn't scream. He didn't call for blood. What he did was more effective. He read Caesar's will aloud. Every Roman citizen would receive 75 drachmas, roughly 3 months' wages for a laborer. Caesar's private gardens along the Tiber would be opened as public parks forever. Antony paused. He held up Caesar's toga, torn, stained with visible stab wounds. He pointed to each cut and named the senator responsible. The crowd started weeping. Then Antony asked one question. Does this look like the body of a tyrant? The crowd surged. They ripped wooden benches from the forum, broke apart merchant stalls, tore doors off nearby buildings, and built a pyre right there in the open square. They cremated Caesar's body on the spot. Then they grabbed torches from the fire and went hunting. Mobs swept through Rome that night. The homes of known conspirators were set on fire. A poet named Cinna, who had nothing to do with the assassination, was beaten to death in the street because he shared a name with one of the conspirators. The Liberators barricaded themselves on the Capitoline Hill with gladiators hired as bodyguards. Within 48 hours of killing Caesar, the men who planned to save Rome couldn't safely walk through it. Over the following weeks, a fragile truce held. Antony negotiated an amnesty. The assassins wouldn't be prosecuted, but Caesar's laws and appointments would remain in effect. It satisfied no one. Brutus and Cassius lingered in Rome for a while, but the streets were hostile. Veterans of Caesar's campaigns cursed them openly. Public opinion had turned completely. One by one the conspirators left the city. Brutus went to Athens. Cassius went to Syria. Decimus went north to command his legions in Gaul. They told themselves they were regrouping. They were running. And here's where everything accelerates. Because while the assassins scattered across the Mediterranean, a new player arrived in Rome, an 18-year-old with no military experience, a frail body, and a name that would make him the most dangerous person in the ancient world. His name was Gaius Octavius. Caesar had secretly adopted him and made him his primary heir, and what this teenager did over the next 12 years makes the assassination itself look like a footnote. When Octavian arrived in Rome in April of 44 BC, no one took him seriously. He was 18. He had been studying in Apollonia, modern-day Albania, when news of Caesar's murder reached him. His mother and stepfather told him not to go. Refuse the inheritance. You'll be killed. He went anyway. His first act was to legally assume Caesar's name. He became Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, and he immediately used that name to recruit Caesar's veterans, tens of thousands of soldiers who had spent years fighting in Gaul, Africa, and Spain, had been promised land and money upon retirement. With Caesar dead, those promises were in jeopardy. Antony had seized Caesar's funds and was distributing them selectively. Octavian sold his own property. He borrowed from Caesar's allies, and he paid the veterans out of his own pocket. One by one, entire legions switched their loyalty. Antony dismissed him publicly, calling him a boy who owes everything to a name. That boy would outlive him by decades. By late 43 BC, the political situation had fractured into open chaos. Antony controlled the largest army. Octavian had the Caesar name and growing legions. Lepidus, another of Caesar's former generals, held forces in Gaul and Spain. Rather than destroy each other, they made a deal. On a small island in a river near Bononia, the three men met and divided the Roman world between themselves. They called it the Second Triumvirate. Their first order of business was a list. The triumvirs needed money, they needed to eliminate enemies, and they needed to send a message. So they revived an old Roman practice, the proscription, a list of names posted publicly in the forum. If your name appeared, you were legally dead. Anyone could kill you. Your property was seized by the state. Your family lost all legal protection. Anyone who sheltered you faced execution. The first list: 300 senators, 2,000 equestrians. The negotiations were transactional. Antony wanted Cicero dead, Rome's greatest orator, the man who had publicly savaged him in a series of devastating speeches called the Philippics. Octavian initially resisted. He eventually traded Cicero's life for his own political opponents. On Antony's list, Lepidus gave up his own brother. Cicero was 63 years old, 40 years as the most influential voice in Roman politics. He had exposed conspiracies, defended the Republic in dozens of courtroom battles. He believed until the very end that words were more powerful than swords. When the proscription lists went up, Cicero tried to flee by sea. Bad weather forced his ship back to shore. His slaves carried him on a litter toward another port. Antony's soldiers caught him on a road outside his villa. Cicero reportedly told his slaves to set the litter down. He looked at the approaching centurion and said, "There is nothing proper about what you are doing, soldier, but do try to kill me properly." They cut off his head, and both his hands. Antony had the head brought to him. According to multiple Roman historians, his wife Fulvia took Cicero's severed head, placed it on her dining table, pulled out the tongue, and stabbed it repeatedly with a hairpin. For all the speeches that tongue had made against her husband, the head and hands were nailed to the rostra in the forum, the very platform where Cicero had delivered his most famous speeches. The message was clear: eloquence will not save you. And if Cicero, the most famous man in Rome outside the triumvirs themselves, could be killed and displayed like a trophy, then no one was safe. The assassins were next. Gaius Trebonius had one job during the assassination: keep Antony out of the room. He did it. He stood in the corridor and talked while the daggers came out inside. After the killing, Trebonius fled east and became governor of the province of Asia, modern-day Western Turkey. In early 43 BC, one of Antony's commanders arrived in the region with an army, captured the city of Smyrna, and took Trebonius alive. What followed was not a quick execution. Trebonius was kept alive for days, beaten, tortured. When it was over, he was beheaded. His head was kicked through the streets of Smyrna like a ball, then sent to Antony. Trebonius was the first of the assassins to die. He would not be the last. Decimus Brutus, the man who personally walked Caesar to his death, had been assigned the province of Cisalpine Gaul after the assassination. He had legions. He had a strategic position. For a brief moment, he was one of the most militarily powerful conspirators. It fell apart fast. When Antony marched north to claim Gaul, Decimus was besieged at the city of Mutina. The Senate, still partially sympathetic to the conspirators, sent armies to relieve him, Octavian among the commanders. The siege broke. Antony retreated. Then Octavian turned. Rather than continue supporting the conspirators, he made his deal with Antony. Decimus suddenly had no allies, no political support, and legions that no longer answered to him. His own soldiers began deserting. He disguised himself and tried to flee north across the Alps toward Brutus's forces in Macedonia, traveling with a small escort through hostile territory. A Gallic chieftain named Camillus captured him. Decimus tried to bribe his way out. It didn't work. Camillus sent a message to Antony, asking what to do with the prisoner. The answer came back: kill him. Decimus was executed in a remote village in Gaul. The man who had walked beside Caesar on the last morning of his life died far from Rome, abandoned by everyone he had ever trusted. His head was sent to Antony. The rest fell in a cascade. Minucius Basileus, one of the more aggressive senators during the stabbing, was killed by his own slaves. They turned on him in his home. Tullius Cimber, the man who gave the signal by grabbing Caesar's toga, fled east and tried to build a naval force. Defeated at sea, disappeared from the historical record. Most scholars believe he died in the fighting. Casca, who struck the first blow, likely died at Philippi. Some sources suggest suicide. Others, Galba, Pontius Aquila, and more, were killed in various skirmishes and battles throughout the civil wars. The pattern was identical every time: flee, fight, lose, die. No one came to save them, but the two men who mattered most were still alive. Brutus and Cassius had spent 2 years raising armies in the eastern provinces, 19 legions between them. They controlled Greece, Syria, and much of Asia Minor. They believed they still had a chance to restore the Republic. By autumn of 42 BC, two massive armies faced each other across a narrow plain in northern Greece, near the town of Philippi. Brutus and Cassius, roughly 100,000 men, anchored on high ground, supplied by sea, dug into fortified positions. Antony and Octavian, a slightly larger force, but exhausted from the march through Greece, low on supplies, and dealing with Octavian's chronic illness. By some accounts, Octavian was so sick, he had to be carried on a litter. The strategic advantage belonged to Brutus and Cassius. They had the position, they had the supply lines. All they had to do was wait. Antony knew this, so he forced the issue. He launched a direct assault on Cassius's wing, driving through marshy terrain to attack the fortifications. Hand-to-hand combat through trenches and makeshift walls. Antony's forces broke through. Cassius's camp was overrun, but on the other side of the battlefield, Brutus had attacked and was winning. His forces smashed into Octavian's wing, overran the camp, and sent Octavian's soldiers fleeing. Octavian himself barely escaped. One account claims he hid in a marsh. The battle was a draw, but Cassius didn't know that. From his position, all he could see was his own camp burning, and enemy soldiers everywhere. A cloud of dust from Brutus's successful charge looked from Cassius's vantage point like enemy reinforcements arriving. He sent a scout to check. The scout rode toward the dust, but couldn't identify the cavalry through it. Cassius waited. The scout didn't return fast enough. Cassius concluded the battle was lost. He turned to his freedman, a man named Pindarus, and ordered him to carry out a pact they had made. If capture was imminent, Pindarus would kill him. Pindarus drove his sword through Cassius's neck. Cassius died on the same blade he had used to stab Caesar. Minutes later the scout returned. The cavalry were Brutus's men. They had won their side of the battle. Cassius had killed himself over a misread signal. When Brutus found the body, he reportedly called Cassius the last of the Romans. But he refused to hold a public funeral, fearing it would collapse morale. He was right to worry. After the first battle, Brutus still had a viable army. His supply lines were intact. His position was defensible. But something had broken. Soldiers deserted. Officers argued. Brutus, a philosopher, not a general, struggled to hold the coalition together. Antony kept probing, extended his lines, cut off water sources, sent agents to bribe defectors. For 3 weeks, Brutus watched his army dissolve. On October 23, 42 BC, he launched a second attack. Historians debate whether he was forced into it by mass desertion, pressured by officers, or simply couldn't bear the waiting. The result was the same either way. Antony's forces held, then counterattacked. Brutus's lines broke. The retreat became a rout. By nightfall, Brutus had withdrawn to a hilltop, with a handful of loyal officers. The army was gone. The cause was finished. According to Plutarch, Brutus spent his final night quoting a line from a Greek tragedy. He said he had practiced virtue his entire life, and found it to be nothing but a slave to fortune. At dawn he asked each of his remaining companions to help him die. Every one of them refused, except one, his friend Strato. Brutus ran onto the sword. When Antony found the body, he reportedly covered it with his own purple cloak, and ordered a proper cremation. Octavian, by contrast, had the head cut off, and sent to Rome, to be placed at the foot of Caesar's statue. The head never arrived. The ship carrying it sank in a storm. Philippi didn't end the killing. It ended the war. The remaining conspirators, scattered across the Mediterranean, fragments of a failed revolution with nowhere left to go. Some joined rogue fleets and fought on as pirates. Some tried to disappear into provincial obscurity. None of it worked. The triumvirs had long memories and the entire Roman military machine at their disposal. The last known surviving assassin was Cassius Parmensis, a minor figure, a senator and a poet. After Philippi, he joined Sextus Pompey's fleet, then Antony's forces, then tried to survive alone. In 30 BC, 14 years after Caesar's death, Octavian's agents tracked him to Athens. He was executed. Roman sources note that in his final days, Cassius Parmensis was plagued by nightmares. He reported being visited in his sleep by a dark, enormous figure that refused to speak. He was the last of the assassins. After him there were none. Here's what the assassination of Julius Caesar actually produced. 60 senators killed one man to prevent a dictatorship. Their act triggered 17 years of civil war. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians died across 3 continents. The Roman Senate became irrelevant. The legal and political institutions the conspirators claimed to be protecting were dismantled, not by Caesar, who was dead, but by the wars fought in his name. The teenage boy everyone dismissed became Caesar Augustus. He ruled for 41 years. He held more power than Caesar ever had. He was officially deified by the Roman state, just like his adopted father. The republic the assassins died for never came back. The dictatorship they killed to prevent became permanent. And Caesar, the man they stabbed 23 times and left bleeding at the base of Pompey's statue, was worshipped in temples across 3 continents for the next 400 years. Every single one of his killers is remembered for exactly one thing, and not one of them is remembered well.